In 1947, in the center of the Judean Desert, a silent, calcified sound echoed across the earth, where the silence was so intense that, sitting in the desert, a young Bedouin shepherd, searching for a wild goat, threw a stone toward a cave. However, when you discover the usual ecological nature of the rock, you hear a strange and peculiar sound, similar to that of ceramic tiles. This stone was struck by an object that does not need to be discovered, although there is only hope that it will be. Inside the cave, hidden for over 1,000 years, are scrolls of leather and paper, delicate and dark with age, yet surprisingly alive. These texts, preserved in barrel-shaped containers that we recognize as Qumran manuscripts, represent more than just an archaeological discovery. His entry into a dark age of ancient beliefs and a particular spirituality, a legacy already passed down by an enigmatic community that holds secrets we do not understand. Who are the authors of these writings? Why do we want to preserve the truth, and why do we decide to bury it in a remote place before the world sees it? This discovery is just a discovery, or rather a fracture in the official religious narrative. This is the point where history and faith intersect and question each other. Have you ever heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Qumran Scrolls? Apocryphal texts not accepted by the Church as canonical, but which reveal curious religious alternatives. What does apocryphal mean? Apocryphal means hidden. It's an attribution the Church itself gave to these texts. It's almost as if they wanted to hide the original biblical texts. In other words, apocryphal texts are texts that have been excluded from the official Bible, whether Jewish or Christian, but are often considered important, even fundamental, by minority groups, ancient religious movements, and contemporary scholars. Many of the texts discovered at Qumran are apocryphal or pseudepigraphic, that is, attributed to biblical figures but probably written by others. Some were completely unknown before their discovery in 1947, making them incredibly fascinating because they show that the spiritual world of antiquity was much richer and more multifaceted than anyone ever thought. Today, we're going back in time and examining some sensational official documents that are rewriting the history of religion as we know it. So, get your popcorn ready, and if you enjoy these topics, leave a like. And now, hold on tight, because we're just getting started. These texts were not lost, but rather hidden, perhaps intentionally, perhaps in haste, or with the understanding that their content was too powerful to be left in the hands of the conquistadors or, worse still, the heirs to the religious power of the time. The community that wrote them, identified by many scholars as the Essenes, was a radical Jewish sect that had broken away from the temple. They lived ascetic lives, awaiting the apocalypse, the final battle between good and evil, and the return of a messianic figure. It is possible that they preserved knowledge that transcended the thinking of their time. Since their discovery, various archaeological expeditions have explored every cave in the Judean Desert, unearthing more than 800 fragments, some complete and others worn by the passage of time and the intense heat of the region. Their significance is striking because, beyond their historical and religious value, these writings seem to suggest a different, or at least richer and less filtered version of the biblical tradition. This raises the question: who decided what was authentic and what was not? Today, most of the manuscripts are housed in Jerusalem, in the Shrine of the Book, a highly protected site within the Israel Museum. Some fragments are also in the United States, in private collections, where they are the subject of ongoing disputes over their ownership and authenticity. But how were they read? How could such an ancient and fragile set of texts, often written in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, be deciphered? The task was monumental and required the collaboration of a team of linguists, philologists, and historians of religion dedicated to their restoration, digitization, and comparison with canonical scriptures. Many fragments were burned at the edges, torn, and almost illegible, some appearing to be written in code between ritual formulas and religious symbols. However, after decades of patience, the enigma gradually revealed itself, and with it, the deepest doubts appeared. Among the recovered texts, there is one that really made me think, that really stirred my brain. The Isaiah scroll, practically identical to the one contained in the modern Bible, but 1,000 years older. This discovery overturns previously accepted chronologies, showing how certain passages were transmitted with remarkable fidelity, which is truly astonishing. I wonder if the Isaiah scroll corresponds perfectly to the part found in the Bible. Could it be that the Qumran manuscripts contain the biblical story in its original version? As we know, the Bible as we know it has been rewritten hundreds, if not thousands, of times over the centuries for religious purposes. But what if, through the Isaiah scroll, we had found a kind of Rosetta Stone? Who decided what was true and what was not? The canonical Gospels are also pseudepigraphic, attributed to the apostles, but in reality, no one knows who wrote them. So, what do the Dead Sea Scrolls represent? Perhaps the original version of the Bible? Among the lost scrolls are the Book of Jubilees, the Book of Enoch, the War Scroll, the Manual of Discipline, the Hymns of Thanksgiving, and fragments of unpublished texts bearing strangely enigmatic names. The Book of Mysteries, the Vision of the Cloud, and even passages that seem to describe celestial realms, otherworldly entities, and higher planes of existence. The most striking fragments of the apocryphal texts, compared to the traditional narrative of the canonical Bible, seem to emerge precisely at the moments when the line between the human and the divine becomes most tenuous, when the intervention of higher entities on earth is most tangible and least symbolic. While the Bible as we know it tends to restrict the direct action of God, angels, and supernatural figures within certain limits, the apocryphal texts found at Qumran present a much more complex and, in some cases, decidedly physical picture. It's as if certain truths have been ignored or reinterpreted to create a more uniform and controllable message. What if we told you that 2,000-year-old documents mentioning extraterrestrials were found in a cave? You might think these are conspiracy theories, but I ask you to wait a moment before judging. One of the most notable differences from the canonical Bible concerns the Book of Enoch, which describes in detail the descent of celestial beings known as Watchers to Earth, their carnal relations with human women, and the birth of a hybrid race, the Nephilim. In the biblical canon, these events are mentioned very superficially, almost as if they were a peripheral aspect. However, in the apocryphal texts, they become the heart of a shocking narrative, with specific details about the forbidden knowledge these vigilantes brought to humanity, such as astronomy, metallurgy, and even the occult arts. This is where the story becomes very delicate, as the depiction of angels teaching science and technology to mortals, defying God's will, raises profound reflections on the truly extraordinary technology and knowledge of that era, as well as on the possible interactions between the celestial and terrestrial worlds. In the same Book of Enoch, we find another disturbing detail for classical tradition. Enoch does not die, but is taken to heaven in a chariot of fire. The apocryphal text describes an almost interstellar journey, with visions of celestial spheres, multiple luminous entities, and chambers in the sky where the destiny of humanity is discussed. This perspective is more akin to modern science fiction than religious imagery. However, as absurd as it may seem, there are 2,000-year-old texts, discovered in a cave and translated without historical or political influence, that tell how celestial beings descended from the sky, initiated humanity into civilization, and took one of their own. In the official Bible, everything is reduced to a brief mention. Enoch walked with God, then disappeared because God took him with him. However, the apocryphal text analyzes this episode and transforms it into a much deeper story, in which God or his messengers perform a tangible intervention on the physical plane. Would you like me to provide you with a historical context and a more in-depth framework for investigation to understand all this? The Qumran manuscripts are older than the canonical texts. Don't you think they may have recounted events that were later marginally included in the canonical Bible, but in the first version? Another text that deviates considerably from the canonical Bible is the War Scroll. This is not metaphor or allegory. It is an authentic military manual that offers a detailed description of a final battle between the children of light and the children of darkness, including tactics, weapons, timing, and methods. The apocalyptic vision is taken literally here. This is not just a spiritual prophecy, but a battle strategy that must be applied in the real world. Guess who is in your name? Celestial beings. The canonical Bible, particularly the New Testament, maintains the idea of a universal judgment and a messianic return, but never offers such specific instructions on how to wage holy war. Instead, the war scroll appears to have been written with the intention of preparing the chosen people, or the Qumran community, for physical conflict on earth, reflecting the forces and principles of cosmic order. In the disciplinary manual and other fragments, we find rules that demonstrate even greater severity and isolation than those described in the Old Testament. These texts describe a kind of ideal community, with rules of purification, collective prayers, very strict prohibitions, long penances, and liturgies unknown to most contemporary Jews. These rigorous rules were supposedly imposed by celestial beings on small communities. The canonical Bible certainly focuses on laws and rituals, but it does not transform daily life into a set of almost monastic acts. In the disciplinary manual, however, mystical visions and precepts for life coexist, resulting in these people being considered almost elect, eagerly awaiting imminent divine intervention. If we then consult other fragmentary texts, such as the Book of Mysteries or the Vision of the Cloud, we find references to luminous beings, multiple celestial dimensions, and a language that lies somewhere between the prophetic and the esoteric. Certain passages in the Book of Mysteries and the Vision of the Cloud mention parallel realities and a veil separating the ordinary world from a spiritual realm inhabited by angelic figures whose names never appear in the canonical Bible. This vision of a stratified cosmos, where humans can access or be introduced to other realities, is similar to certain hypotheses proposed by contemporary physics, particularly in the context of quantum mechanics and multiverse theories. Of course, it is essential to be careful not to confuse the religious or mystical categories of a text from 2,000 years ago with current scientific formulations, which rely on mathematical models that can be verified or refuted. It is curious, however, to observe how remarkably similar certain concepts can seem to ideas explored in modern academia. It is truly astonishing, almost unsettling, to think that ancient texts over 2,000 years old were found in a cave forgotten for millennia, and to discover that many of them contain the same stories that appear in the Bible, but in longer, more detailed versions, richer in elements that were eliminated or ignored in the canonical texts. It is even more curious, or perhaps significant, to note that these additional details, which classify them as apocryphal, openly address the existence of celestial beings who have descended to earth, luminous creatures, strange sightings in the sky, the transmission of advanced knowledge to primitive humanity, higher dimensions, and concepts that we might today relate to the multiverse or extraterrestrial interactions. These are texts that do not simply speak of faith, but offer an ancient vision of the world in which the line between the divine and the cosmic, between the religious sky and the starry sky, seems to become truly blurred. And then the inevitable question arises, because here we are moving forward out of curiosity. Why were these versions excluded from the official Bible? Shouldn't they have been included? Finally, it is crucial to highlight the issue of messiahship and the references to the Gospels. This is truly interesting. Certain passages in the Qumran Scrolls strikingly announce the arrival of a Son of Man in terms similar, if not identical, to those attributed to Jesus in the Gospels, and yet these prophecies seem to predate the versions of the Gospels we know today. This raises another question. How much of the Christian message can be derived from the Qumran traditions? Why are these texts not included in the official canon, despite their chronological proximity to the birth of Christianity? These are questions that preoccupy scholars and that the Church, over the centuries, has preferred not to address publicly. The difference lies essentially in what the canonical Bible does not say, which, through centuries of tradition and councils, has become more homogeneous and politically manageable thanks to rewriting. The apocryphal texts, on the other hand, retain a much wilder tone, where the divine and the human intertwine in a way that official theology has considered uncomfortable, even heretical. It is precisely in these gray areas of religion that the most shocking pages are found. The vigilantes who teach forbidden arts, the Nephilim, hybrids between angels and earthly women, the instructions for war against dark forces, and the journeys of prophets who are kidnapped and transported through the heavens. All of this, from a historical perspective, seems absurd. These details destabilize the classical narrative of religion and open unexpected perspectives on the history of religions and, perhaps, on the concept of contact between our world and something greater that observes us. Thus, at the end of this journey through sand, parchments, and forgotten fragments, a silent truth begins to emerge. The Qumran manuscripts are not mere historical testimonies. They are echoes of a forbidden memory, traces of a time when the line between heaven and earth was thin and uncrossable. A time when human beings were in search of the divine, but also when the divine seemed to seek humanity. We found texts that speak of celestial knowledge, entities from the sky, cosmic wars, prophets taken to heaven, and laws imposed by beings from another world. These texts were erased from official history, not because they were false. Mind you, they are not, but because they were embarrassing, clearly apocryphal, since they raised questions too vast and dangerous, beyond the control of human doctrine. Thus, we find ourselves today, millennia later, with these fragile documents in our hands, worn by time but still extremely alive and vibrant. We wonder, who really wrote our spiritual history? Who decided what we should know and what we should forget? Perhaps the Bible we know is just one version among many, and perhaps Qumran is a window onto what has been taken from us. Perhaps among these scrolls there is still a voice that speaks to those who are willing to listen. The real question now is, do we have the courage to listen? At the end of this video, I invite you to delve deeper into the apocryphal texts. And that's all for today. Please let me know what you think in a comment. I'm very curious to hear your opinions. If you enjoyed the video and think it's worth watching, I'd appreciate it if you could leave a like and a comment to help the video rank higher in the platform's recommendations. If you're new and interested in the topics we cover, please subscribe to the channel, as we need to grow. Thank you for staying with me until the end, and as always, I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks.